So I'm just going to talk about a couple of things. And as was said there, I'm a professor of international law, amongst other things. So, I mean, firstly, just to focus on the legal aspects, I mean, you'd be unsurprised to know that what's going on is without doubt illegal, what's being carried out in Gaza. Two particular things I think stand out. The obligation in the Geneva Conventions to allow for collective relief to be provided to a population. And also the obligation to not engage in collective punishment. And I think we can safely say this is collective punishment. Yeah, my video, is my image showing on the video? Or does it matter?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, that's good. Yeah. All right. So yeah. So I think we can clearly say this is collective punishment as well. And this is the thing about these legal claims is that they're new in the sense that they're obviously at a very heightened rate, and we can't really remember anything like this. I mean, certainly many of us observing what's going on in Gaza never thought it would go on this long and to this level of intensity. I mean, I thought it would be a couple of months. You know, we're looking at, like a year now almost. But all of the things that are happening have pretty much been happening before, but now to I think to a heightened level. So particularly, I think about collective punishment as an argument that's been around for like 25 years, since the Intifada, the second Intifada. So definitely we can say these things are illegal. In summarizing, most of you probably know this already. There is the genocide case, which was brought by South Africa. We're still waiting to hear the end results of that. There are some preliminary rulings requesting Israel to stop certain activities because it is believed that these will facilitate ongoing genocide. But there's no definitive ruling as yet on that. There is a recent case that was decided, which is actually just completely separate and just happened to come along at this time, which was the General Assembly resolution seeking an advisory opinion from the International Court of Justice. Just to clarify, the genocide case is an International Court of Justice case. Many of you will know that Israel doesn't play ball with international courts, but it has to in the case of the genocide case because it's obviously signatory to the Genocide Convention. And unfortunately for Israel, the Genocide Convention says that in the event of a dispute, it has to go to the International Court of Justice. So that's the reason why they had to kind of turn up and argue with South Africa. The reason why South Africa brought the claim is something my students ask me. And it's one of those questions where you sort of think, why South Africa? Well, the answer is why not? I mean, any state can bring a claim against another state in the International Court of Justice. There doesn't have to be any direct link. There are political reasons for it. And certainly, the previous South African regime was closer to Israel. And so there's an element of, I'm talking about the regime that was the apartheid regime was closer to Israel. And there's South Africa showing some leadership on this. But then there is also, as I mentioned, another ICJ case, which is just happened to come along at this time and was brought previously, which is an advisory opinion from the General Assembly relating to the occupation in both Gaza and the West Bank and East Jerusalem. And what's exactly, somebody in the chat has said that Gambia brought the case on Myanmar. And again, Gambia is, thousands of miles away and there's no obvious connection. So this is a similar example of that happening. But the advisory opinion is interesting because it is a very, very damning advisory opinion. I mean, it basically holds Israel responsible for everything it's accused of. I can say safely that pretty much everything that the General Assembly asked about, the Court of Justice said was in fact occurring. The problem is that it's only an advisory opinion because the General Assembly can only ask for advisory opinions. For it to be an actual case, it would have to be brought by another state, and that didn't happen. But it is extremely damning, and advisory opinions are good statements as to the law. It's just they don't produce binding outcomes. And then, of course, the other legal development is the issue of the request for arrest warrants by the International Criminal Court. This is slightly complicated. Israel, as you're going to guess, is not a member of the International Criminal Court, but the state of Palestine as a member of the General Assembly of the United Nations is. And so they're able to argue that these events are occurring on their territory, and therefore the ICC should have jurisdiction. The way it works, again, some of you probably know this, but the way it works is that the ICC prosecutor has to ask for an arrest warrant, and the judges then have to approve the arrest warrants. So the arrest warrants that we have against Netanyahu and Gallant have not actually been affirmed yet. The good news is that every time previously that they've been asked, pretty much every single time, the judges have issued the arrest warrants. So it'd be very surprising if these arrest warrants were not issued. They're taking their time over it. They didn't take this long with the Vladimir Putin one, but they're taking their time over this one probably for all kinds of complicated political reasons, which you can guess at. So there's that. And I just want to mention a couple of other things briefly. One of the things that interesting, I actually spoke to a colleague at Amnesty International the other day, and they were very keen to make it clear that Amnesty International are present on the ground operating in Gaza. They weren't willing to tell me how exactly Amnesty International had gotten into Gaza, but they mentioned that they were there. I agree with the previous points made about airdropping aid is pointless. It's something that the West does. If you remember in 2001, in September 2001, the US Air Force was airdropping aid into Afghanistan with staggeringly poor success rates. They weren't dropping in the right place, and also lots of people who were picking up the aid weren't convinced they could eat it because they were illiterate and they were worried that it wasn't meeting their dietary requirements. Plus, it's just dropping aid is just a bad idea. I mean, like was mentioned, it goes in the sea, and some of it just lands on people's heads and kills them that way. And I agree with that as well. I would also highlight something that Mr. Swanson could have, I think, mentioned, but I suggest as well that the amount of money that's being spent on missile defense in this is absolutely ridiculous. The money that is spent on missile defense to shoot down an attack would be so much better used building bridges in communities and stopping this from actually happening. And in terms of the overall question of how do we improve matters, 2 points in terms of how to improve the humanitarian situation. You can't really do much during a shooting war. It's incredibly difficult to distribute aid during a shooting war. You need peace of some kind first, and that's a political question. So there's that. And also, if you go and look at the United Nations summary, and it's actually out of date because it's a summary based from April, they can give you a summary of how much money they think they need in the immediate term to rebuild Gaza, and that's based around the fact that everything just stopped today, and the Gazan economy was allowed to rebuild, and something like $20 billion in short order would be needed. And just as a last controversial point to throw out, I might suggest that some of the governments that signed the Abraham Accords a few years ago and recognized Israel have been desperately silent in terms of de-recognizing Israel, which they could easily do. They might want to put up some of the money towards that. One of them, the United Arab Emirates, is an extremely wealthy state, and to use a phrase mentioned earlier, it's just pocket change to them. So those are some of the legal aspects and a little bit of political analysis. And I think I've gone over my time, so I'll stop now.